In a seemingly routine trip, 63-year-old Margaret Holloway's day turned into a nightmare when she was unjustly arrested in a disabled parking spot despite having a valid permit. Handcuffed and humiliated, Margaret's ordeal sparked a nationwide conversation about disability rights. Her story, captured on video, led to a significant movement for change, highlighting the need for better awareness and legislation. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. The warm summer sun cast a golden hue over the bustling parking lot of Meadowbrook Shopping Center, illuminating the scene with a vibrant glow. Cars maneuvered slowly in search of an available spot, their drivers scanning the rows of vehicles with a mix of hope and impatience. Among the sea of metal and glass, a silver Honda Civic glided gracefully into a disabled parking space near the entrance. The vehicle came to a halt, and the door opened with a gentle whoosh, revealing a slender hand that reached out, steadying itself on the car frame. Margaret Holloway, a 63-year-old woman with a lifetime of experiences etched into her kind blue eyes, carefully emerged from her car. Her salt and pepper hair was styled in a neat, short bob, framing her face with an air of grace and resilience. Despite the bright sunlight, her eyes crinkled at the corners with a mixture of determination and contentment. Margaret retrieved her collapsible cane from the vehicle, unfolding it with practiced ease. This cane, more than just a mobility aid, had become an integral part of her existence, a constant companion that had supported her through a decade of challenges and changes. With each step toward the entrance of the shopping center, Margaret felt a modest sense of triumph. The arthritis in her hips was less bothersome today, and the proximity of the parking spot to the entrance was a small but meaningful victory. Her errands were straightforward: a visit to the pharmacy to pick up a prescription, and perhaps a visit to the quaint bookstore nestled in a corner of the shopping center. This weekly outing was not merely a chore but a cherished ritual, a moment to maintain her independence and engage with the world outside her home. As she approached the automatic doors, a gruff voice interrupted her thoughts. "Hey, stop right there!" Startled, Margaret turned to see a police officer approaching her with a purposeful stride. His face was set in a stern expression, his youthful features suggesting he was in his late 20s or early 30s. His close-cropped dark hair and well-built physique indicated he was no stranger to physical training. "Is there a problem, officer?" Margaret inquired, her voice steady despite the anxious flutter in her stomach. The officer, identified by the name badge as Officer Bates, scrutinized her with an intense gaze, his eyes lingering on her cane. "Mom, are you aware that you've parked in a disabled parking spot?" he asked, his tone carrying an air of authority. Margaret blinked in surprise, momentarily disoriented. "Yes, I am aware. I have a valid disabled parking permit, and it's displayed in my rearview mirror." Officer Bates's expression remained unchanged, a mask of professionalism that conveyed no hint of empathy. "I'm going to need to see some identification and proof of your disability," he declared, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. The request sent a jolt of indignation through Margaret, electrifying her already tense nerves. In all her years of navigating life with her disability, she had never been subjected to such a blatant, intrusive challenge. "Officer," she said firmly, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil, "I've done nothing wrong. My permit is displayed on my vehicle, and I am not required to carry additional proof of my disability with me at all times." The officer's jaw clenched, a clear sign of his frustration. "Ma'am," he said, his voice cold and authoritative, "if you can't provide immediate proof of your disability, I'm going to have to ask you to move your vehicle." Margaret stood her ground, her cane pressed firmly into the pavement as if it were an extension of her resolve. "I will not move my car. I have every right to park here, and I do not appreciate being harassed for simply going about my day." The scene was drawing the attention of those nearby. A small crowd began to form, their murmurs of curiosity and concern punctuating the tension in the air. Officer Bates reached for his radio, his movements deliberate and unyielding. "Dispatch," he said into the radio, his voice firm and commanding. "I need backup at the Meadowbrook Shopping Center. I have an uncooperative subject in a disabled parking spot who is refusing to comply." Margaret's heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of fear and disbelief flooding her senses. This couldn't be happening. She was a law-abiding citizen, a retired school teacher who had never so much as received a parking ticket. And now, for the first time in her life, she found herself being treated like a criminal merely for existing in her own body. Her voice trembled as she tried again to reason with the officer. "Officer, please," she pleaded, her desperation evident. "This is a misunderstanding. I'd be happy to show you my disabled parking permit card if that would help." But Officer Bates seemed to have reached a point of no return. As a second police car rolled into the parking lot, its lights flashing and siren blaring, he turned back to Margaret with a steely gaze. "Ma'am," he said, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. "Put down the cane and place your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for fraudulent use of a disabled parking space and failure to comply with a police officer." If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 1 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. The world around Margaret seemed to tilt, her sense of reality warping as she felt the cold metal of the handcuffs encircle her wrists. The cane clattered to the ground, leaving her unsteady and exposed. Tears welled up in her eyes, a cocktail of fear, humiliation, and utter disbelief. As Officer Bates began to recite her rights, Margaret caught sight of a young woman in the crowd, her phone held high, capturing every moment of the ordeal on video. In that harrowing moment, as she was guided towards the waiting police car, Margaret had no inkling that this deeply demeaning experience would soon ignite a significant shift within her community and beyond. The police car doors slammed shut with a final resounding thud, and as the vehicle pulled away from the shopping center, Margaret closed her eyes, trying to process how what should have been a simple trip to the pharmacy had spiraled into the most terrifying and bewildering day of her life. Inside the stark, fluorescent-lit confines of the police station, the overhead lights buzzed incessantly, casting an unforgiving glare on Margaret's pale, distressed face. She sat on an uncomfortable plastic chair, her cane a cruelly distant reminder of her vulnerability, propped up against the wall just out of her reach. Officer Bates, stationed at a nearby desk, busily filled out paperwork, occasionally glancing up at Margaret with a look of indifference. Though the handcuffs had been removed, the sensation of confinement lingered, an invisible weight pressing down on her shoulders, amplifying her sense of isolation. As the minutes dragged on, Margaret's thoughts churned with confusion and self-reproach. How had this nightmare come to pass? What would her neighbors think? What would her family say? The shame and humiliation were almost too much to bear. But beneath the surface, a burgeoning flame of anger began to take hold. This wasn't right, she had done nothing wrong. And yet here she was, subjected to such unjust treatment. The sound of hurried footsteps jolted her from her reverie. A middle-aged man in a crisply tailored suit burst into the room, his face etched with a mixture of concern and determination. "Margaret Holloway," he said urgently, approaching her with a sense of purpose. Margaret nodded slowly, her mind swirling with confusion and a whirlwind of emotions that left her feeling unsettled. As she tried to process the situation, David Chen's presence offered a glimmer of hope. Kneeling beside her chair to establish eye contact, he introduced himself with a reassuring tone. "I'm David Chen from the Disability Rights Legal Center," he said, his voice steady and kind. "We received a call about your situation. I'm here to help." A wave of relief washed over Margaret, feeling like a warm embrace amidst her turmoil. She exhaled deeply, her voice wavering as she spoke. "Oh, thank goodness," she murmured, her eyes filled with both gratitude and anxiety. "I don't understand what's happening. I've never been in trouble with the law before." David gently placed a comforting hand on her arm, his touch a small anchor in the storm of her emotions. "Don't worry, Margaret. What happened to you is wrong, and we're going to make it right," he said with conviction. Turning his attention to Officer Bates, his demeanor shifted to one of determined authority. "I'd like to speak with the officer in charge, please. Also, I want all charges against Miss Holloway dropped immediately." As David engaged in a heated and assertive discussion with the police officers, Margaret's mind wandered, reflecting on how swiftly and dramatically her situation had escalated. It was no longer just about her, a young woman recording the incident at the shopping center, the rapid response from the Disability Rights Legal Center. Her nightmare was evolving into a broader issue, attracting unforeseen attention. An hour later, Margaret found herself in the more tranquil environment of David Chen's office, cradling a steaming cup of tea in her hands, seeking solace in its warmth. The charges against her had been dropped, but she knew the ordeal was far from over. David leaned forward in his chair, his expression serious but empathetic. "Margaret, he began, what happened to you today is unfortunately not an isolated incident. Discrimination against people with disabilities, especially those with invisible disabilities, is more widespread than many realize. And your case, well, the video of your arrest has gone viral." Margaret's eyes widened in disbelief. "Viral? You mean people are seeing it on the internet?" David nodded solemnly. Yes, millions of people. Your experience has struck a deep chord, shedding light on a serious issue that is often overlooked or ignored. As David continued to explain the situation, Margaret was overcome with a complex mix of emotions. The thought of her humiliation being broadcast to the world was almost unbearable, making her want to retreat into herself. Yet it was evident that her story was sparking important conversations about disability rights and justice, creating a broader awareness that could lead to significant change. Taking a moment to gather her thoughts, Margaret asked, her voice trembling yet determined, "If my experience can help prevent this from happening to someone else, what happens now?" David's expression hardened with resolve. "Now we fight not just for you, Margaret, but for everyone who has faced discrimination because of their disability. We have a unique opportunity to drive real change, advocate for better training for law enforcement, and raise awareness about invisible disabilities. But it won't be easy. Are you ready for this?" Margaret took a deep, steadying breath, recalling all the times she had felt invisible, the struggles she faced to explain her disability, and the judgmental glances when she used her disabled parking permit. She thought about others like her, perhaps even older or more vulnerable, who might be facing similar discrimination. "Yes," she said, her voice resolute and full of newfound strength. "I'm ready. Let's do this." As Margaret left David's office that evening, she felt an intense and conflicting blend of exhaustion and determination. The events of the day had rattled her deeply, challenging her sense of normalcy and justice. Yet, amid the turmoil, she experienced a profound awakening, a burning desire for justice, not solely for herself, but for everyone who had ever been marginalized or wronged due to their disability. Unbeknownst to Margaret, this was merely the beginning of a significant journey. The video capturing her arrest was about to ignite a nationwide discussion, shedding light on issues that had long been ignored or concealed. At the heart of this unfolding narrative was Margaret, a retired school teacher who had always shunned the limelight, but was on the verge of becoming an unexpected champion in the struggle for disability rights. In the days following her arrest, the video spread rapidly across social media platforms. It was shared, commented on, and fervently debated in numerous online communities. News outlets picked up the story with fervor, running headlines such as "Disabled Woman Arrested for Using Disabled Parking Spot and Viral Video Exposes Discrimination Against Invisible Disabilities." Margaret found herself thrust into the eye of a media storm. Her phone incessantly rang with requests for interviews, and reporters set up camp outside her modest bungalow, eager to capture a glimpse of the woman who had unwittingly become the face of a crucial civil rights issue. Initially, the overwhelming attention was a source of distress for Margaret. She had always been a private individual, content with her tranquil life and a close-knit circle of friends. However, as she perused the thousands of supportive comments and messages flooding in from across the nation, she began to understand the significance of her situation. With the guidance of David Chen, Margaret agreed to participate in a select number of interviews. Sitting in her living room, surrounded by the comforting familiarity of her books and family photographs, she recounted her harrowing experience to empathetic journalists. "I never sought to be a spokesperson," Margaret confided during one interview, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. "But if my experience can help others and drive meaningful change, then I feel a duty to raise my voice." As Margaret's story gained momentum, it catalyzed a broader dialogue about the treatment of individuals with disabilities. Disability rights organizations seized this opportunity to emphasize the need for enhanced education and awareness regarding disability issues. Yet not all the attention was positive. Critics emerged, questioning the authenticity of Margaret's account and accusing her of exaggerating or fabricating the incident for personal gain. Online trolls left disparaging comments, questioning whether she truly deserved a parking permit given her appearance. These harsh reactions were painful, but they only strengthened Margaret's resolve. Each negative comment served as a stark reminder of the importance of her fight. Meanwhile, the Meadowbrook Police Department found itself under intense scrutiny. The police chief issued a public statement committing to a thorough investigation of the incident and a review of the department's training protocols. Officer Bates, the young officer responsible for Margaret's arrest, was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. As the details of the incident unfolded, it became evident that Officer Bates's actions were not an isolated lapse, but rather a reflection of a broader systemic issue, a profound lack of training and understanding when it came to interacting with individuals with disabilities, especially those with invisible ones. The incident quickly garnered attention from local politicians and advocates for disability rights. State Senator Eleanor Hawkins, a longtime champion for disability advocacy, expressed her outrage during a press conference. "What happened to Ms. Holloway is entirely unacceptable," Senator Hawkins declared. "This incident underscores a critical need for stronger legislation to safeguard the rights of individuals with disabilities and to ensure that law enforcement officers receive comprehensive and empathetic training on this matter." In the weeks that followed, Margaret Holloway found herself at the forefront of a burgeoning movement for disability rights. Activists and supporters rallied together, organizing protests and marches to demand justice not only for Margaret but for all those who had faced similar discrimination. The movement gained momentum, drawing widespread attention to the pervasive issues of bias and misunderstanding faced by people with disabilities. One sunny Saturday morning, Margaret stood poised at the podium in front of Meadowbrook City Hall. The crowd before her was a tapestry of faces, some she recognized, many she did not, united in their support for her cause. With David Chen by her side and her trusted cane firmly in hand, Margaret took a moment to steady herself, her heart racing with both nerves and resolve. "A month ago, I was simply a retired teacher going about my day," she began, her voice quivering slightly at first but gaining strength with each passing sentence. "Today, I stand before you as someone who has not only faced the harsh reality of discrimination, but has also witnessed the incredible power of standing up and speaking out." Margaret recounted the fear and humiliation she had experienced during the incident, her words painting a vivid picture of the distress and confusion she had felt. Yet she also spoke with deep gratitude for the overwhelming support she had received from the community since then. "This isn't just about my personal experience," Margaret continued passionately. "It's about every individual who has been judged, questioned, or discriminated against due to a disability, whether it's visible or invisible. It's about forging a world where every person is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve, regardless of their abilities or how they might appear." If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 2 below to let me know you're still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. As Margaret concluded her speech, the crowd erupted in applause, their cheers resonating with a shared commitment to justice and equality. As she made her way back to her seat, supported by David Chen, a young woman in a wheelchair approached her, her eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and empathy. The woman extended her hand, her voice trembling with emotion as she said, "Thank you for giving us a voice, Margaret. Your courage is inspiring." Margaret smiled warmly, her heart swelling with the knowledge that her struggle had sparked a broader movement toward understanding and change. "Thank you," the woman said, her voice quivering with emotion as tears glistened in her eyes. "Your courage has given me the strength to share my own story of discrimination." Margaret's heart swelled with a mix of pride and resolve. It was moments like these that solidified her commitment to the cause. She might not have chosen this path, but now that she was on it, she was determined to see it through to the end. As the rally drew to a close and the crowd began to disperse, Margaret's gaze fell upon a familiar figure standing at the periphery. Officer Bates was positioned at the edge of the gathering, his demeanor a complex tapestry of shame and determination. Their eyes locked briefly, and Margaret perceived something unexpected, a glimmer of understanding and a silent plea for forgiveness. In that fleeting exchange, Margaret grasped a profound realization: genuine change required more than the enactment of new laws or enhancements in training. It demanded open hearts, a willingness to learn, and the courage to admit one's mistakes. As she left the rally, leaning on her cane and enveloped by a supportive community of newfound allies, Margaret felt a surge of hope for the future, a vision of a world where incidents like hers would be relegated to history. As summer transitioned into autumn, the momentum sparked by Margaret's case showed no signs of waning. Her experience became a beacon for disability rights advocates across the country, igniting discussions in living rooms, classrooms, and legislative chambers alike. Margaret found herself immersed in a whirlwind of activity. Her calendar brimmed with speaking engagements, strategy sessions with advocacy groups, and consultations with David Chen to navigate the ongoing legal dimensions of her case. Despite the relentless schedule, Margaret felt invigorated by the newfound sense of purpose that had entered her life. One crisp October morning, she found herself in a conference room at the state capitol, flanked by David Chen and Senator Hawkins. Across the table, a diverse assembly of lawmakers, police representatives, and disability rights advocates convened. The purpose of their gathering was to deliberate on a groundbreaking piece of legislation known as the Holloway Act, a bill designed to enhance law enforcement training and safeguard the rights of individuals with disabilities. Senator Hawkins took the floor to explain the specifics of the Holloway Act. The proposed legislation would mandate extensive disability awareness training for all law enforcement officers. It would also establish explicit guidelines for interactions with individuals who have both visible and invisible disabilities, and create a task force dedicated to reviewing and improving accessibility in public spaces. As the group delved into the details of the bill, Margaret marveled at the journey she had undergone. Just months before, she had been handcuffed in a parking lot, a victim of injustice and misunderstanding. Now, she was actively contributing to the formulation of policies poised to impact millions of lives, making a tangible difference in the landscape of disability rights. The contrast between her past and present underscored a profound transformation, and Margaret felt a deep sense of fulfillment and optimism about the future. The discussion was not without its hurdles. As the meeting progressed, various representatives from law enforcement expressed their reservations. Some voiced concerns about the financial burden and time commitment required for additional training programs. Others were apprehensive about the potential misuse of disabled parking permits, fearing that increased awareness could lead to more fraudulent use of these accommodations. Margaret, drawing from her extensive experience as a mediator and educator, listened intently to each point of view, her background in resolving conflicts coming to the forefront. When it was her turn to speak, Margaret took a deep breath and leaned forward, her posture embodying both calm and determination. Her voice was steady, yet imbued with the gravity of the situation. "I understand the concerns raised here today," she began, addressing the room with a blend of empathy and resolve, "but we must keep in mind what's truly at stake. Every instance where a person with a disability is mistreated or misunderstood by law enforcement represents a profound failure of our system. Each time someone is unjustly made to feel ashamed or criminalized for using the accommodations they require, it signifies a deviation from our societal ideals of justice and compassion." She paused, letting her words resonate with the attendees, making sure to meet their gazes. "This isn't about placing blame, it's about education, understanding, and striving for improvement. The financial cost of additional training is minor compared to the societal cost of ongoing discrimination and the erosion of trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. We must remember that this issue affects real people, and the impact of inadequate training extends far beyond the immediate financial implications." Her message seemed to hit home with the group, fostering a thoughtful atmosphere. By the end of the meeting, a tentative consensus emerged to move forward with the bill, albeit with some modifications aimed at addressing the specific concerns that had been raised. The decision marked a critical step towards improving the system, but Margaret knew it was just the beginning. As Margaret left the Capitol building, a mix of satisfaction and apprehension accompanied her. She had achieved a significant milestone, but the road ahead remained long and challenging. Back in Meadowbrook, the effects of the heightened public scrutiny were already beginning to manifest. The police department, now under intense pressure, had initiated new training programs focused on disability awareness and de-escalation techniques. Officer Bates, who had been placed on administrative leave following the incident, had undergone extensive sensitivity training and counseling. Unexpectedly, Officer Bates reached out to Margaret through David Shen, requesting a meeting. On a crisp November afternoon, Margaret found herself sitting across from Officer Bates in a quaint, serene corner of a local coffee shop. The young officer, markedly different from the stern and authoritative figure she had encountered earlier, appeared visibly weary and burdened by genuine remorse. His shoulders were slumped, and his eyes betrayed a deep mixture of shame and earnest determination. "Miss Holloway," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I want to offer my sincerest apology for what happened that day. I made assumptions and acted without a full understanding of the situation. Over these past months, I have taken time to reflect deeply on my actions and have committed myself to learning about invisible disabilities. I understand that words alone cannot undo the harm done, but I want you to know that I am fully dedicated to making meaningful changes in my approach and ensuring that such mistakes do not recur." Margaret studied Officer Bates, observing the sincerity reflected in his eyes and the palpable weight of regret he carried. Although it would have been easy to cling to her anger and reject his apology, Margaret recognized an opportunity to transform a former adversary into a potential ally. "Officer Bates," she replied, her voice soft but unwavering, "what happened that day was indeed traumatic for me. It shook my confidence in the very systems that are supposed to protect and serve us. However, I can see that you are genuinely committed to learning and growing from this experience." She took a moment to sip her tea, gathering her thoughts before continuing. "I accept your apology. More importantly, I am interested in understanding how you plan to utilize this experience to foster positive change within your role and contribute to a broader cultural shift in law enforcement practices." Her words hung in the air as the two of them shared a moment of reflection. Margaret's willingness to engage with Officer Bates, despite the painful experience, represented a significant step towards healing and progress. It also highlighted her commitment to turning adversity into an opportunity for greater understanding and systemic improvement. Officer Bates straightened up, a determined glint in his eye. "I've been collaborating with the department to overhaul our training programs," he began. "In addition to that, I've started a support group for officers to discuss complex situations and learn from one another. I was hoping you might be willing to address our next class of recruits, sharing your experience and perspective." Margaret was momentarily taken aback by the request. The idea of speaking to a room full of police officers was intimidating, yet she recognized the profound potential of such an opportunity. After a moment's contemplation, she nodded thoughtfully. "I believe that could be very valuable, Officer Bates," she responded with resolve. "Let's work together to ensure that what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else." As they continued their discussion, Margaret felt a significant weight lifting from her shoulders. This meeting represented more than just an act of forgiveness. It symbolized a commitment to creating a positive shift, a chance to transform a painful ordeal into a catalyst for growth and systemic change. In the weeks that followed, Margaret found herself in front of a room full of eager police recruits, each one fresh-faced and attentive. She shared her story with them, detailing the events and her subsequent reflections, and answered their questions with candor. The experience was both challenging and rewarding. She witnessed the recruits' confusion slowly giving way to understanding as they grappled with the complexities of law enforcement in a diverse society. Officer Bates stood by her side throughout these sessions, offering insights from his own experiences and highlighting the lessons he had learned. Together, they were influencing a new generation of officers to approach their duties with greater empathy and awareness. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment on number 3 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. As winter settled over Meadowbrook, the Poway Act continued its journey through the legislative process. Margaret frequently traveled to the state capitol, where she testified before legislative committees and engaged with lawmakers. One snowy evening, as she sat by her fireplace reviewing notes for her upcoming testimony, her phone rang. It was an unexpected call from a national disability rights organization. "Miss Holloway, we've been closely following your work," the organizer's voice crackled through the receiver, filled with admiration. "Your story and advocacy have inspired countless people across the country. We'd be honored if you could be a keynote speaker at our annual conference." Margaret felt a surge of both excitement and nervousness. Speaking at a national conference was a significant departure from her previous life as a high school English teacher, but she recognized the importance of the opportunity. She took a deep breath, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'd be honored to accept," she replied. "Thank you for considering me for this role." This new chapter marked a pivotal moment in Margaret's journey, where her struggle was evolving into a powerful force for national change, and she was stepping into a role she had never anticipated, yet embraced with newfound purpose and resolve. As she gently placed the phone back in its cradle, Margaret's eyes were drawn to the cane resting against the arm of her favorite armchair. Once she had viewed it merely as a symbol of limitation and vulnerability, a constant reminder of her struggles and the physical constraints imposed upon her. Now, however, she understood that this very cane represented far more. It was a badge of resilience, a testament to her strength and perseverance. It had become an essential tool that had propelled her into a new and unexpected chapter of her life. Margaret's thoughts drifted back to that fateful day in the parking lot, a day etched in her memory with vivid clarity. She remembered feeling utterly helpless and humiliated, the weight of her circumstances pressing down on her with an overwhelming force. If someone had approached her in that moment of despair and told her that her ordeal would lead to groundbreaking statewide legislation, a transformation in police training practices, and a prominent platform to advocate for disability rights on a national scale, she would have dismissed them as unrealistic dreamers. Yet, as she stood at this very crossroads, preparing to address lawmakers, train police officers, and speak to disability rights advocates from across the country, the reality of her journey was both astonishing and humbling. As the spring season unfolded in Meadowbrook, bringing with it a sense of renewal and hope, Margaret found herself standing before an audience of hundreds in a grand owl, the setting for the National Disability Rights Conference. The warm glow of the spotlight enveloped her as she adjusted her reading glasses and took a deep breath to steady herself. A year ago, Margaret began, her voice steady and resonant. I was a retired teacher leading a quiet and unassuming life. The thought of standing here today, sharing my personal story with all of you, was beyond my imagination. Life, as it turns out, has a way of unfolding in the most unexpected ways. As Margaret recounted her journey, the arrest, the viral video that captured her ordeal, and her subsequent advocacy work, she could see the audience's nods of recognition. Many faces in the crowd mirrored her own experiences of discrimination, each bearing the mark of being misunderstood or judged unfairly due to their disabilities. But my story, Margaret continued with earnestness, is not an isolated case. It is a narrative echoed by countless individuals who live with disabilities, particularly those with invisible conditions. What sets this moment apart, Margaret emphasized, is the unique opportunity we now have to effect enduring change. She elaborated on the Holloway Act, a piece of legislation that had been successfully passed in her state and was now under consideration in several others. Margaret spoke passionately about the police training program she had developed in collaboration with Officer Bates, highlighting the positive feedback they had garnered from both law enforcement officials and community members. Change is within our grasp, Margaret declared with unwavering conviction. Achieving it demands persistence, bravery, and a readiness to engage in challenging conversations. Above all, it requires us to recognize and honor each other's humanity, to listen to each other's stories, and to champion each other's rights. Margaret's words resonated deeply with the audience as they stood together on the brink of a new era of understanding and advocacy. As Margaret concluded her speech, the room erupted in a thunderous wave of applause. People sprang to their feet, their hands clapping vigorously, and many faces were flushed with emotion, tears shimmering in their eyes. Margaret stood at the podium, her heart racing as she felt the overwhelming wave of appreciation and support from the audience. The gratitude and enthusiasm of the crowd were palpable, and she was both humbled and exhilarated by their response. This was more than she had hoped for. It was a profound affirmation of her purpose, and a powerful reminder of the impact of her voice. Determined and emboldened, Margaret resolved to harness this momentum to drive meaningful change and make a significant difference in the world. In the months that followed, Margaret's advocacy work blossomed with remarkable speed. She embarked on a journey that took her across various states, speaking at a series of influential conferences and engaging in crucial dialogues with lawmakers. These conversations centered on advancing disability rights legislation and addressing systemic issues of discrimination. Her compelling story captured the attention of national magazines and major talk shows, further amplifying her message and drawing widespread awareness to the pressing issues of disability discrimination. Back in Meadowbrook, the effects of Margaret's tireless efforts became increasingly apparent. The local police department had wholeheartedly adopted the new training program she had championed. Reports began to emerge of improved interactions between officers and individuals with disabilities, showcasing a growing culture of respect and understanding. Officer Bates, who had been reinstated, took on a pivotal role in leading the department's community outreach initiatives. His efforts were focused on fostering a stronger connection between law enforcement and marginalized communities, creating a more inclusive environment for everyone. On a warm summer day, nearly a year after the incident that had dramatically altered her life, Margaret found herself back at the Meadowbrook Shopping Center. As she parked her car in the now familiar disabled spot, she took a moment to reflect on the transformation that had occurred. With her cane in hand, she approached the entrance of the shopping center, her heart swelling with a sense of accomplishment. As she navigated towards the entrance, Margaret noticed a young mother who appeared to be struggling with managing a child in a wheelchair while simultaneously handling a shopping bag. Without a second thought, Margaret stepped forward to offer assistance. "Let me help you with those bags," she said warmly, extending a helping hand. The mother looked up, her expression shifting to one of relief and gratitude. "Oh, thank you so much," she said, her voice tinged with appreciation. As they walked together, the mother introduced herself as Sarah and her daughter as Emily. Emily, a bright-eyed girl of around 10, gazed up at Margaret with a look of recognition. "I know you," Emily said excitedly. "We learned about you in school. You're the lady who helped make things better for people like me." Margaret felt a lump form in her throat as she processed the significance of this moment. To know that her story was being shared in schools and inspiring young minds was an honor beyond her wildest dreams. "That's right, sweetheart," Margaret replied, her voice choked with emotion. "You know what? People like you with your bright smile and strong spirit are the ones who inspire me to keep going." As they reached Sarah's car and began loading the shopping bags, Margaret noticed a bumper sticker proudly supporting the Holloway Act. "Thank you," Sarah said, her eyes glistening with sincere gratitude, "not just for the help today, but for everything you've done. You've made a real difference in our lives." If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 4 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. As Margaret watched Sarah and Emily drive away, she was overcome with a profound sense of purpose and fulfillment. The past year had been a journey of highs and lows, filled with moments of frustration, perseverance, and triumph. Standing in the same parking lot where her journey had begun, Margaret felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had transformed a moment of injustice into a powerful catalyst for change. Through her resilience and dedication, she had discovered a strength she never knew she had, and had become a voice for those who often went unheard. Most significantly, she had demonstrated that a single individual, regardless of age or physical ability, could indeed effectuate a meaningful and enduring transformation in the world. As Margaret turned to resume her errands, her gait carried a renewed sense of purpose. Her cane, once perceived as a mere symbol of limitation, now felt like a conductor's baton orchestrating a symphony of change. She was acutely aware that there remained challenges to tackle, conflicts to address, and minds to influence, but she embraced the future with readiness and determination for whatever lay ahead. Margaret Holloway had absorbed the most invaluable lesson of all, that it's never too late to advocate for what is just, to embody the change one wishes to see in the world. As she entered the bustling shopping center, a smile spread across her face, knowing that her journey was far from complete. It was, in fact, just beginning. Epilogue: A legacy of change. 5 years had elapsed since that pivotal moment in the Meadowbrook Shopping Center parking lot. Margaret Holloway, now nearing her 70th birthday, sat in her warmly adorned living room, surrounded by tokens of her journey, framed newspaper clippings documenting her impact, photos from her numerous speaking engagements, and a special plaque commemorating the nationwide adoption of the Holloway Act. The doorbell chimed, and Margaret rose with deliberate care, her movements both measured and resolute. She opened the door to find a familiar face, Officer Bates, now promoted to Captain Bates, standing on her doorstep with a bouquet. "Happy birthday, Miss Holloway," he greeted with a warm and genuine smile. "I hope I'm not intruding." Margaret welcomed him inside, her heart touched by the thoughtful gesture. "Not at all, Captain. After all these years, I believe you can call me Margaret." As they settled into the living room, Margaret reflected on how far they had both come. Captain Bates had evolved into a leading advocate for community-oriented policing, frequently addressing conferences about the crucial role of empathy and understanding in law enforcement. "I have some exciting news," Captain Bates announced, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "The Police Academy has decided to name its new disability awareness training program after you, the Margaret Holloway Initiative for Inclusive Policing." Margaret's eyes filled with tears of gratitude and astonishment. "Oh my," she murmured. "I never could have imagined this. It is such a profound honor." As their conversation continued, Margaret's mind wandered to the myriad lives impacted by the reforms initiated by her experiences. The Holloway Act had been adopted in every state, instituting comprehensive disability awareness training for law enforcement and enhancing protections for individuals with disabilities. She thought of Emily, the young girl she had encountered in the parking lot years ago, who had recently written to inform her about founding a disability advocacy group at her high school. She recalled the many officers she had addressed over the years, witnessing the dawning of understanding in their eyes. Above all, she thought of her younger self, the woman who had once felt so powerless and humiliated in that parking lot. If only she could return to that moment and tell her that her darkest hour would become the spark for such profound and positive change. As Captain Bates was about to leave, he hesitated at the door and turned to Margaret with a thoughtful expression. "You know, Margaret," he began, "that day in the parking lot stands out as the greatest mistake of my career. However, it also led to the most significant lesson I've ever learned. You taught me, and all of us, the profound power of turning adversity into opportunity. You showed us that when faced with ignorance, we should respond with education rather than anger." Margaret's smile was warm and reassuring as she placed a gentle hand on his arm. "We all have the potential to learn and grow, Captain. What truly matters is our willingness to engage in that process and put in the effort." Once Captain Bates had left, Margaret returned to her living room. Her eyes fell upon a framed quote on the wall, a poignant reminder of words she had shared years ago at the National Disability Rights Conference. "Change begins with one voice, one story, one act of courage." As she settled into her favorite chair, a profound sense of peace and accomplishment washed over Margaret. She had never sought out heroism or public acclaim. Instead, she had simply stood up for what she believed was right, using her voice to bring attention to critical issues. In doing so, she had initiated a ripple effect that had grown into a powerful wave of change, impacting countless lives and reshaping policies across the nation. Margaret came to understand that her legacy was not merely defined by the laws or training programs that bore her name. It was embodied in the many individuals who had been inspired to speak out, advocate for themselves and others, and strive for a more just and inclusive society. As the evening sun cast a warm golden light through her window, Margaret closed her eyes, feeling a deep gratitude for the unexpected journey that had led her to this moment. She had learned that it's never too late to make a difference, that every voice carries weight, and that some of the most transformative changes often begin in the most unassuming places, even a shopping center parking lot on an ordinary summer day. Margaret Holloway's story was far from finished, but she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the same courage, determination, and compassion that had brought her this far. She was committed to continuing her journey of inspiration, proving that one person, at any stage of life, has the power to affect real change in the world. Thank you for joining us today and for being part of this important conversation. We've covered a lot of ground, from the inspiring story of Margaret Holloway's unexpected journey to becoming a voice for disability rights, to the broader implications for how we address discrimination and advocate for change. So, what have you learned so far? We'd love to hear from you. Comment below and share one key takeaway from today's discussion and how you plan to bring that lesson into your own life. If you found this video valuable, please leave your comment below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support helps us continue to bring these vital stories and discussions to light. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.